A thing or two about being a Conservative rebel. Nigel Farage, is this the silly season a little bit, do we think, or is this sort of serious rumblings of discontent with broke-back dining clubs?
Well, I think that David Davis himself has been pretty disenchanted with things for even before the coalition was formed, just because of Project Cameron.
Yes.
I have to say, I like political insults. I've
Yes,
traded a few myself, and I've received a few.
And you think that's a good one, do you?
I thought it was very funny.
What about?
Very funny. And the idea of this dining club,
yes.
Well, Michael Howard called UKIP gadflies some years ago, and I am self-appointed life president of the Gadfly Club, and we dine once a month, so I'm very much hoping to be invited as a guest to the Brokeback Club.
Yes, so do you think... Yes, I'll wait with bated breath. Do you think there might be some benefit for UKIP here? Do you think you may be able to make hay of any of these rumblings, particularly if you are invited to one of these dining clubs?
Just look at what they're doing on law and order. I mean, it seems to be the sort of prison is now an outdated concept from Crispin Blunt. Look at the fact the coalition has accepted a European foreign policy. I mean, you can go through a long list and you can see huge discontent on the backbenches, but out in the country, I mean, there's a growing realisation that there isn't really a Conservative Party anymore. So potentially, if UKIP gets its act together, there are a lot of votes out there.
Yes, and what about tempting some of these Conservative backbenchers over to your side?
Well, I don't know. It's a bit early for that yet, but it's not impossible. I mean, let's just see what direction this government takes. But if it goes on as it is, the discontent will grow.
You used to be in the...
I worked in banking, and I have to say, I thought that the decision to put banking regulation from the Bank of England to the FSA was a disastrous one. And so I was pleased to hear in the Mansion House speech George Osborne say that that was going to be put back to the Bank of England, where there was some real expertise. But the real worry, of course, is that we now know that probably by the 1st of January there is going to be an EU banking regulator, and so really whatever Vince Cable says and whatever George Osborne says, at the end of the day, our banks will be regulated and controlled from the EU.
But will that EU regulation have anything to do with the amount of lending that banks
In terms of
do?
ratios, yes, very much so.
In terms of the capital ratios?
Absolutely.
But that's probably a good thing, isn't it?
That depends where they're set.
The failure of the capital ratios of having a certain amount of capital to back up the massive borrowing, we need to tighten these things.
Whether
that's always international.
Yeah, whether they set the right ratios or not, we'll have to wait and see. But the point is, it's not just banking. We've also got an insurance regulator and an equities regulator. So Britain's biggest industry, which is financial services, will be controlled from Brussels from the 1st of January next year.
Because a number of the international lenders who were in this market, the Germans, Commerzbank and so on, were big lenders, they've all gone home. So it's really only the British banks doing the lending now.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I find the Cable argument slightly odd, though, because he is saying, look, I want you to repeat that very pattern of behaviour that got you into trouble in the first place, and I find that very strange indeed.
And Nigel Farage is still with us. So, Nigel, what went wrong in the general election for you?
Well, our vote increased by 50% from the last time round.
But no seats.
But no seats. Look, the first past the post system is a nightmare for us. You know, we are the largest party in the country, unrepresented in Westminster. If we were having a referendum next year on the AV Plus system, then you'd see plenty of UKIP MPs.
Do you think, really, are you that confident that you
if it was AV Plus, yes, I've absolutely no doubt about it. We would return. I mean, look, under proportional representation, we came second across the entire country.
But as it stands, we don't have proportional representation.
I know.
So where does the party go from here? I mean, all of that, of course, is speculative, if, when, and all the rest of it.
Just remember, you know, since the Second World War, there have been hundreds of political parties formed. Only one has gone on to come second in a national election. So UKIP has come a long way. Yes, it's got further to go, but I think politically, our main point has always been that we think we should govern our own country and make our own laws.
Yes.
And more of that is being given away by this coalition government.
Will you support the AV referendum? Will you support a referendum that brings it in that sense, if you're wanting...
AV as it is, the proposal as it is not proportional.
So you won't support it?
So, I mean, it's very uninteresting. We would like to see AV Plus, which, after all, is what Roy Jenkins recommended with that commission back in 1998.
AV wouldn't make much difference to you then? Just AV on its
very
own?
little.
But it might make a bit of difference.
Make a bit of difference, but I don't think overall AV is not going to excite the British public. It doesn't introduce proportionality.
So will you campaign against it?
I'm disinterested, frankly.
Right,
As things stand, disinterested.
Yes, you're not interested. OK, now, I mean, the seat in...
Sorry about that.
That's all right. No, I have no feelings either way. But in terms of the seat that you campaigned in Buckingham, now, you had that terrible accident which Andrew referred to. What happened? Sorry, not wanting to sort of completely record, but what did actually happen? All we saw were those dreadful pictures, you know, the next day, and it looked terrible.
Well, it was a banner towing exercise, and what you do is you take off and you circle and you pick the banner up and you whiz around, and when you come back, you dump the banner. You can't.
This is the banner that flies off the back of the
Yeah.
That's
planes.
right. That's right.
You see them at seaside resorts.
You see them in the, you know, you see them advertising a local circus or whatever it may be. What you don't realise is how big and heavy those banners are. So you can't take off or land with the banners. When we picked the banner up, for some reason that I don't yet know, it wrapped around the tail and the rudder. And so from that moment onwards, we were doomed and we were going to crash. And it sort of, the pilot took it up and he circled round so that we'd crash back on the airfield rather than way out in the country. And it was a very long 4 or 5 minutes, I have
bet.
to
You were
say.
very lucky, weren't you?
Incredibly lucky.
I was
mean,
the pilot.
slightly worse than me. He's got some internal organ problems, so I've got my fingers crossed for him. But we were both lucky to survive it.
Now, I mean, all that behind you, what about interest in leading the party again?
Not at the moment, no. I am delighted to have got out of that aeroplane crash. I'm pleased to have got back to work. I'm operating at perhaps just a touch more than 50%. But you can't pretend that having had an experience like that, that you can suddenly get back to normal. It's going to take me a long time to get back to being fit enough to take on the kind of workload that I had before. So leading UKIP is not in my mind at the moment.
Okay. Thank you.
And Edward Macmillan-Scott joins us now from Birmingham. Nigel Farage is still here in London too. Thank you for that piece laying out you stalled there. So let me go to Nigel Farage and get a reaction. I mean, isn't the problem as being fundamentally a one-issue party, that the issue at the moment, you may think there are important things going on, but for most people in the country, Europe is just not a great concern at the moment.
Well, I mean, what is for certain is during the election, and even now, Mr Cameron and Mr Clegg would rather not even discuss the European question. But what is happening, and then Edward was right in the film, in saying that increasingly decisions that affect the lives of British people are taken by European institutions. Absolutely. We now have accepted an EU foreign policy. We see the newspapers today talking about European arrest warrants and people's loss of liberty. I mean, these are real issues.
And yet they don't seem to resonate with the public. When the Post has asked people, what's your biggest concern at the moment, Europe is pretty far down the list.
Oh, I don't agree with that. If the pollsters ask people on major concerns, immigration comes out at the top or perhaps second. And you can't have your own border policy and be part of a European Union. People are not interested in the ins and outs of Article 47 of the Lisbon Treaty, but what they do care about is how this affects their lives. And the point, I think, the important point is this. You know, I don't want there to be an EU foreign policy, an EU police force. Edward does. But my point is this. We haven't legitimised this in a referendum, and therefore it shouldn't be happening.
To Nigel Farage, with the euro having been kicked into the long grass, even staunch Europhiles like Nick Clegg don't want to talk about it, say it's not going to happen for the foreseeable future. In a sense, that's a bone that's been taken away from you, because the way you could galvanise opinion would be if the euro was an immediate prospect.
I mean, we shouldn't forget that people like Nick Clegg would have signed us up to it over a decade ago, and just look what that would have done to the British economy. So they shouldn't get away scot-free with this one. You're right, the euro is the easy thing for the public to focus on and understand. But look, in the autumn of this year, my friend Mr Van Rompuy is going to come back with a plan to control national budgets and to put in place, as I mentioned earlier, a regulatory framework for our entire financial services industry. And Edward's former party, the Conservatives, 22 out of 25 Tory MEPs voted for a European banking regulator. So we have not just the Lib Dems, but we have the Conservatives in government giving more power away to Brussels.
So is that right? What are you saying to the banks being regulated from Brussels?
I think it's fair to say that George Osborne, in his first outing as Chancellor, very successfully negotiated the British position on that, which is to be much more, how can I put it, liberal as far as the City of London is concerned. And it is probably true that there are many Europeans who'd like to regulate the City of London out of existence. And that is an area, incidentally, where I think it's really important that British MEPs vote together. I looked this morning and I discovered that my patriotic record of voting for the country is twice as good as Nigel's.
Oh, please.
No, it is.
Oh,
Nigel,
please.
I'm sorry, this is according to the LSE. You know what they do, the LSE, every single vote. I know you haven't been around for a few months.
Are you handing stars out to yourself here?
You know, but when it comes to the national interest, we should be working together.
There you go. A new coalition could be formed here on the air of the Daily Politics.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Edward, I'm sorry. I believe that politics needs opposition. I am opposed to our laws being made by the institutions of Brussels, and I want the British people to have a free and fair referendum so that they can sort it out for themselves.
I wouldn't talk about the voting record of other parties in the European Parliament before looking at your own.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't think what really matters are the ins and outs of how people vote in the European Parliament. What matters is whether the people,
I'm sorry, Nigel,
whether the people have endorsed this. And Edward, you are part of it, along with the Labour and the Conservatives. You have all told the British people lies about this by denying them the chance to have their say.
Well,
Yes.
We're going to have some emails. And
yes, well, I mean,
if
this from Colin Driver saying it doesn't matter what these politicians say, the people of this country should have a referendum instead of opting out of Europe. I would then go along with the majority vote, says Colin. And this from John West: why is the UK Independence Party happy to sit with racist parties in Brussels? His fellow UKIP MEPs, well, there's Mike and Nikki Sinclair, who of course we did have on the program, left the group because they didn't want to be associated with Liga Nord. And this actually from Julia Bishop in Newton Abbot: UKIP's failure to win a seat at the general election has to be the loss of Nigel Farage as its leader.
There you go. Bring back Nigel.
Well, I don't know about that.
To find out more about who we are and what we stand for, go to the UK Independence Party website at www.ukip.org.